6 o'clock sharp, twice a day, Rhodesia held its breath. Across the war-torn country, a frantic chorus of voices crackled to life over VHF radio. Farmers' wives, teenage sons, and elderly ranchers quickly recited call signs into bulky handsets bolted to kitchen tables and bunker walls. This wasn't just small talk, it was the Agric-Alert network, Rhodesia's literal 911, and missing roll call was a matter of life or death. If a single station went silent, a police controller in Salisbury would instantly scramble a helicopter or a stick of elite troops to a potential ambush site. This is the untold story of the Bush Telegraph, Rhodesia's most effective, civilian-powered intelligence weapon of the Bush War. Nobody in 1966 sat down and designed a war-winning intelligence system. What became Agric-Alert began as something far more mundane, a way for isolated commercial farmers, scattered across some of the most remote agricultural land in southern Africa, to stay in touch with each other and with the district administration. As the insurgency escalated throughout the 1970s, the Rhodesian Ministry of Internal Affairs formalized and expanded the network, linking farmsteads via VHF radio to a control room monitored around the clock at the local British South Africa Police headquarters. Clusters of farms, sometimes 40 or more in a district, were tied into a single net, each with its own call sign, each obligated to check in twice daily. The genius of the system was its redundancy of purpose. On the surface, Agric-Alert was a safety net, a way to confirm that isolated families hadn't been attacked overnight. But every roll call, every routine all-secure transmission, every panicked Code 1 report of insurgents moving through a farm's cattle paddocks was also raw intelligence, and it was intelligence of a kind the Rhodesian security forces could get almost nowhere else. A conventional army patrol might sweep a valley and see nothing. A farmer's wife, watching her own worker's body language change or noticing footprints in a dry riverbed that hadn't been there the day before, would see everything, because she lived there. She knew what normal looked like, and she knew instantly when it wasn't. This is the detail most retellings of the Bush War skip past. Agric-Alert didn't just save individual families, it fed a structure. Each operational area of the country had a Joint Operations Center, a JOC, where the Army, Police, Air Force, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs district commissioners sat together daily to fuse whatever scraps of information had come in from the field. District commissioners were full members of these JOCs precisely because their staff, district assistants patrolling on foot and bicycle through the tribal areas, were the people most likely to hear the first whisper of guerrilla movement from local villages. Agric-Alert reports from the white farming community were the mirror image of that same ground-level intelligence gathering, just running through the commercial farmland rather than the tribal trust lands. Together, they gave Rhodesia's undersized, chronically stretched security forces something that raw firepower never could: a live, self-reporting human sensor grid covering the entire operational country, refreshed twice a day, for free, by the people who had the most to lose if it failed. That's the part worth sitting with. Rhodesia never had the manpower to patrol every dirt road and every fence line. At its peak, the entire Rhodesian Air Force numbered a little over 2,000 personnel, with barely 150 combat pilots rotating through operational squadrons. The Army was built around small, highly mobile units, Fireforce sticks and Selous Scouts pseudo-teams, designed to react fast to a contact rather than to blanket the countryside. None of that works without queuing. Somebody has to say, here, now, this many. And for years, the people saying it were mothers on a mortar pit radio set, describing exactly where the tracks crossed the cattle grid an hour before dawn. The language of the network itself tells you how seriously it was engineered. Every operator, from a teenager on his family's tobacco farm to the duty sergeant at a district police station, was trained to use a fixed vocabulary of pro words, short, clipped phrases designed to compress urgent information into a handful of syllables and to deny listening insurgents any easy purchase on what was being said. Radio discipline wasn't optional etiquette, it was survival grammar. A Code 1 call meant terrorists were confirmed in the immediate area. A missed check-in triggered escalation without anyone needing to ask twice. Over time, farmers across a district effectively became fluent in a shared operational language that compressed a sprawling, geographically impossible security problem into seconds of airtime, twice a day, on a system that cost the government a fraction of what an equivalent human patrol network would have. It's also worth noting how the network scaled with the war rather than against it. As ZANLA's presence in the northeast intensified through the early 1970s, and as the war crept southward and westward into Matabeleland and the Midlands by the back half of the decade, new districts were folded onto the grid, new call signs were issued, and new control rooms stood up. Technicians from firms contracted to install and service the sets, driving and flying into some of the most contested tribal areas in the country to string aerials and test transmitters, were themselves operating inside the same threat envelope as the farmers they served, a detail almost never mentioned in broader histories of the war's intelligence architecture. Here is where the story stops being a clean tale of clever engineering and becomes something much harder to watch. Agric-Alert worked because ordinary people were willing to sit beside a radio in the dark, in a house with sandbagged walls and a bunker dug into the floor, and calmly report what was happening to them as it happened. Farm families rigged directional anti-personnel devices around their homesteads, fortified perimeter fencing with government subsidy money, and armed themselves down to teenage children, not out of theatrical toughness, but because the alternative to self-sufficiency was often a 20 or 30-minute wait for help to arrive, in a war where 20 minutes could be the entire difference between a hostage situation and a headline. The network's own procedures reveal how seriously the danger was taken. A missed roll call wasn't treated as an inconvenience. It triggered an automatic investigation, and often a helicopter was in the air within minutes. That single design choice, building the failsafe into the silence itself, rather than requiring a victim to somehow raise the alarm mid-attack, is arguably the most quietly brilliant piece of the whole system. It assumed, correctly, that the worst moments of an ambush are exactly when a family cannot get to a handset. So the network didn't wait for a call for help. It treated the absence of a voice as the alarm. And the record of near misses and losses bears out why that mattered. Over the course of the war, hundreds of Rhodesian civilians were killed, a significant number of them on isolated farms, and the security forces themselves lost well over 1,000 personnel responding to incidents across the operational areas. Landmines alone caused thousands of vehicle detonations on rural roads through the 1970s, a threat that made every unscheduled journey, including the drives radio technicians made to install and repair Agric-Alert sets in the most contested districts, a genuine gamble with buried Soviet-supplied anti-tank mines. Technicians recalled entire days spent leapfrogging between farms in mine-proofed Land Rovers lined with conveyor belt rubber, racing to get one more household onto the net before the war caught up with them first. What makes the Bush Telegraph such a counterintuitive story, and why it deserves to be pulled out of the footnotes, is that it inverts almost everything people assume about counterinsurgency intelligence. Popular memory of the Rhodesian War fixates on the Selous scouts and their pseudo-operations, dressing up as guerrillas to infiltrate insurgent networks, and rightly so. That program produced extraordinarily effective human intelligence and is often credited as the single most productive intelligence capability the Rhodesian security forces fielded. But pseudo-operations were a specialist tool, run by a small, elite unit. Agric-Alert was the opposite, a mass participation intelligence network, built not from trained operatives but from civilians who had no interest in espionage and every interest in simply surviving the night. It didn't infiltrate the enemy. It out-organized geography itself, turning isolation, the single greatest vulnerability of a scattered white farming population, into a distributed early warning system that no insurgent force could easily jam, sever, or spoof without announcing exactly where they were. There's also an uncomfortable honesty required here, and it's worth naming directly rather than skating past it. The system that made white farm families safer existed inside, and because of a deeply unequal war, a conflict fought to preserve a government built on minority rule, in a country where the same protective infrastructure was not extended equally to the black Rhodesian civilians living in the tribal trust lands, who suffered their own devastating losses, intimidation, and displacement through the same years, often with far less institutional protection. Understanding why Agric-Alert works so well as a piece of counterinsurgency engineering does not require endorsing the political order it was built to defend, and the most honest way to tell this story is to hold both facts in view at once. It was a genuinely ingenious, life-saving communication system embedded in a war whose underlying cause was the refusal to share political power. By the time the Lancaster House Agreement brought the war to its formal close in December 1979, the Agric-Alert network had become such an ingrained part of rural life that it didn't disappear with the ceasefire. Farming families in Matabeleland and elsewhere kept their radios running well into the 1980s, taking roll call morning and night through the wave of violence that followed independence in the southwest of the country. Proof that the system had outlived the war that built it, because the underlying problem it solved, isolated households needing a fast, reliable way to say we are still here, had never gone away. Farmers interviewed years after independence described the same twice-daily discipline, the same fallback to a telephone if the radio call went unanswered, the same readiness to send out an armed party the moment something felt wrong.